Hello and welcome to episode 31 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's guest is Chris Ballew. Chris was formerly the frontman of the Presidents of the United States of America. He and Mark Sandman from the band Morphine also played in a band together that was called Supergroup. He also did 2 years on the road with Beck. But the thing that really blew my mind was that for the past 16 or 17 years, he's had this secret identity as Caspar Babypants, a kids music performer that makes kids music that doesn't make you want to kill yourself. Another musician dad turned me onto this. He handed me a disc and he was like, "You got to check this out. This is pretty good." And I listened to it for a year and a half and I thought, this guy's voice seems vaguely familiar, but I don't know where I know it from. And then one day, dawn broke on Marblehead and I was like, oh, this is the guy from Presidents of the United States. This is wild. And considering all that they walked away from at the very top of their game, I was sort of curious about why he made that decision. So I had to get him on the phone. And I did. If this is your first episode of Crash and Ride is a long-form interview podcast where I talk to musicians who've survived anxiety, depression, addiction, and abuse. The idea I had when I started this was that if we could have honest, real conversations among musicians about what we're really feeling, then maybe we could start to heal each other and ourselves just a little bit by seeing our suffering and the sufferings of others and understanding that we're all in this together and no one's going to take care of us but us. I am a working musician. I play drums in the rock band 5/8 from Athens, Georgia. I also play drums for the Tokyo rock band Pinky Doodle Poodle. And I also play drums with Mike Mills and his side project, the Mike Mills Concerto. We're doing some shows next week with Chuck Leavell from the Allman Brothers and the Rolling Stones. Right now I'm recording this at my kitchen table, which is not someplace I normally record, but I'm preparing to drive down to Macon, Georgia and go into rehearsals with Chuck for the next week. And the week after that, we're going to do some shows, and here are those dates. September 29th, we're playing Atlanta Symphony Hall in Atlanta, Georgia. October 2nd, we're playing the Lyric Theater in Birmingham, Alabama. October 4th, we're playing the Lucas Theater for the Arts in Savannah, Georgia. And October 5th, we're playing the Miller Theater in Augusta, Georgia. Tickets for those shows are still available, so come see us play. Here's a couple of quick announcements. Crash and Ride is brought to you in part by Greer Amplification. Greer Amps builds the best boutique effects pedals available. If you're looking for an overdrive, boost, fuzz, compressor, or tremolo that is rugged, road-tested, and at home, on stage, in the studio, or in your living room, Greer has a pedal for you. Nick and his staff strive to build the best products around with the best tone you've ever heard. They believe in their products and they stand behind them too, backing each one up with a lifetime warranty to the original owner. Each Greer Amps product is hand-built in Athens, Georgia, USA. Go to www.greeramps.com or visit your favorite music retailer today. Crash and Ride is also brought to you in part by Jittery Joe's, a local coffee roaster based in Athens, Georgia. They have a special espresso blend called Crash and Ride that's named after the podcast. It's available as whole beans or ground in cans at their retail locations or from their website. And hey, by the time you hear this, it should also be available on our website. Go to crashandridepodcast.com. That's the new Crash and Ride website. If you go there right now and it's a hot mess, that's because I didn't finish it this week and I'm a jerk. But I have everything I need to finish it, and it should be there, and you should be able to buy coffee and potentially t-shirts. Everything should be up and running. So crashandridepodcast.com. Crash and Ride Espresso is also available in drinks at Hendershots Coffee in Athens, Georgia. Hendershots is a musician-owned and operated coffee shop right here in Athens, Georgia, just steps away from the UGA campus. It's run by a guy named Seth. Seth is a great drummer. He's also a great guy, and he runs a great coffee shop. Later this fall, I'm doing a live episode of Crash and Ride at Hendershots Coffee. I'm going to interview Bob Sleppy, the director of Nucci Space. If you've listened to this podcast before, you know how much I love Nucci Space. Nucci Space is an unvarnished good thing in the Athens music scene. Nucci Space does a lot of things, but their primary mission is that they provide subsidized mental health care for musicians in the Athens area. There's a dozen ways that they pay for that. They have an ongoing used gear garage sale that happens right there in the lobby at Nucci Space at their location here in Athens, Georgia. They also have incredibly affordable rehearsal spaces that you can rent by the hour. They sponsor the Boys and Girls Rock Camps every summer. They have shows there. They have a coffee bar there. They have a recording studio where they teach young musicians to become recording engineers. And they're also a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you're one of those people who's fortunate enough to have tax liability you want to offset, you can make a tax-deductible donation to Nucci Space. Call 706-227-1515 or go to nuci.org. That's nucci.org. And speaking of nonprofits that I unconditionally support, if you're having a tough time, you need to talk to somebody. If you're struggling with thoughts of self-harm, call 1-800-273-8255 for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's 24/7. It's free. It's confidential. They have trained volunteers to talk you through your crisis. Call 1-800-273-8255 for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. If you're a trans person struggling with anxiety, depression, or gender dysphoria and you need to talk to a peer, call the Trans Lifeline's peer support line at 1-877-565-8860 or go to translifeline.org. All right, today's guest, Chris Ballew, former frontman for a band that was just everywhere all at once and then gone. It was the strangest thing. Presidents of the United States of America had 3 or 4 big radio hits. They were on the radio, they were on MTV, they were on Saturday Night Live, they were on the late night shows, and then all of a sudden, they were just gone. It was the weirdest thing. And that can happen for any number of reasons. But it wasn't what I expected when I finally talked to Chris. Like I said earlier, I was surprised to discover that this children's music that my daughter really liked, and I was actually pretty fond of, was made by the same guy. And so I wanted to ask him, like, what precipitated that? And it's sort of interesting to me that, like, he uses this amazing metaphor to describe fame as this, like, series of empty rooms. You're promised the next room is going to be awesome, and then you get there, and it's more pressure, more stress, more anxiety, and more of the same. And I thought that was really fascinating. I really admire Chris's, like, awareness that he was able to recognize, like, this isn't working for me, and he pulled the plug. In spite of all the temptations of, like, hanging on. There's a popular saying amongst some of my friends, let go or get dragged. And he let go. You know, when I called Chris, I called him from my house, and he was in his house in Seattle. And I could hear the things he's doing while we're talking. Like, he makes tea, he's washing dishes. You can hear it in the interview. It's like he's very much a man at home, at peace. He's made smart decisions. He's got a pretty good life now. And I really respect the decisions that he's made. And I'm really, really glad he took the time to talk to us because I thought it was really informative. So let's jump into my interview with Chris Ballew. Okay, I'm here with Chris Ballew, the former bassist and singer of the Presidents of the United States of America, and now the composer of, 12 records for Caspar Babypants? Is it 12?
I just put out my 16th.
Oh, my goodness. So Caspar Babypants...
16 in 10 years.
That's amazing. Caspar Babypants is the only children's music that I ever, like, voluntarily put on for my daughter, and I love it, and it's one of my favorite things. And I listened to it for about 1.5 years before I found out that the genius behind it was the same guy as the President of the United States of America. But we'll get to all that. First of all, I want to say welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Are you back in Seattle now? Where do you live now?
I live in Seattle. I live in West Seattle, more specifically, which is sort of a mellower, easier to deal with version of Seattle than Seattle proper. However, it's getting a little more crowded, so we're actually going to escape in the next couple of years to Vashon Island, which is a little island near Seattle. So I'm as the city encroaches, I'm hightailing it out of here.
A lot of the musicians I talk to on the show are younger or millennial age, and they're having a really hard time in a lot of situations sort of hanging on in major cities like New York, Chicago, or L.A. And the discussion that we have about that is it sort of the love that you show a city often ends up crushing it, kind of like Lenny and Of Mice and Men. Like, I love the city so much I'm going to hold it so tightly, and suddenly it's no longer the city that you thought it was. Nashville's like that now. And
yeah, I mean, that's just the song of the ages, you know, everything. I mean, when sheet music came along, everybody thought that was the end of live performance, you know. So it's just there's always something encroaching on something and changing it. The startling thing overall, I think, is that we as a species are experiencing such incredible change right now, like in the last, 100 years, versus the previous tens of thousands of millions of years. Well, not millions, but, humans have been around for tens of thousands of years, and nothing changed for long stretches of time.
Yeah.
So we're unique because we still have the same interior sort of makeup as our ancient ancestors, and yet our environment is constantly changing. So whether it's a city or how you make music or how you do your art or how you get to work or where you work or how you work, it's all changing very quickly, and that's very terrifying to the little third down on the food chain, little kind of rodent mammal that we are deep down in our bodies.
Yeah, yeah. A friend of mine once summed it up for me. He said, if you took the entire sort of timeline of the existence of planet Earth and compressed it into 1 year, the amount of time that human beings have been on the planet in that 1 year is 1 minute. And the amount of time that we've actually had, like radio communications, is 1 second.
Yeah, it's 11:59 and 59 seconds on New Year's Eve at the end of that year. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, I know. Yeah, so we think, I don't know, we get kind of caught up in thinking we're the center of the universe still, even though we know, that we revolve around the sun.
Right.
We still have our own internal suns inside ourselves, and we're still like, pre-Copernicus, thinking that we don't have any competitors in this, vast universe.
Yeah.
But we do.
Yeah.
Space, the final frontier. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's like having that kind of perspective is useful because I remember being in sex education class we had it in 5th grade, 7th grade, 9th grade, and 11th grade, and it got more and more detailed and complicated every, couple of years. But
kind of like algebra.
Yeah, I think it was 7th grade when I really got the idea that I was the egg that was fertilized that particular month, and the egg in front of me in line and the egg behind me in line was not me. And that the fact that I got to live at all was like winning this incredible lottery. And then my next thought was, I can do anything I want. I don't have, there's no pressure now because I shouldn't even be here, which I guess I could have gone the other direction and thought, oh my gosh, I feel the weight of the responsibility of being alive and I have to make every moment count. But my gut reaction was, oh, I'm free, I shouldn't even be in the game, but I am. So I'm going to just do whatever I want.
That's interesting when you contrast it to. I had a public school education, but in the Deep South, and I don't think I ever had a sex education class. And certainly the message that I got from the adults around me in preschool and also like Sunday school and all that was like, you were chosen by God to exist, and you have all these rights and responsibilities as a Christian person, and it was crushing. It was
right.
It was a short trip from that to the nihilism of my adolescence, where I started reading books by French people and smoking cigarettes and hating everything.
Right. Well, yeah. You were just following Paul McCartney's lead there. That was his MO when he was trying to pick up chicks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he'd wear a turtleneck and read French poetry in a cafe. That's why he came up with the stage name Paul Ramon, because he thought it sounded like a sort of romantic beatnik poet. And that's actually why the Ramones are called the Ramones, because he used to use that name on stage when they were the Silver Beatles.
That's amazing.
Anyway, not to relate everything to the Beatles, which I could.
So you've had this remarkable life in music. I didn't get a full count of the President of the United States of America records, but also Caspar Babypants, also side work with Beck, also the band Egg, the band Balls. Mm-hmm. Were you from a musical family?
Yeah. Don't forget Mark Sandman and Morphine, and we had a band together called Supergroup. And,
right.
Yeah. Nobody in my family is musical the way I am, but everybody is a little bit, at least as appreciators, and then on up to hobbyists. And my younger brother Tim is a really good writer of prose and fiction, but he isn't getting to do it yet because his life is complicated. But he and I have been writing songs together. My dad was really into hillbilly music, and my mom was into classical music. And somewhere but in between those two is me.
Yeah. Well, I'm from Eden, North Carolina, which is right next to Reedsville, North Carolina, and I have a great uncle who was one of the original clawhammer banjo guys.
Wow.
And my mom was an opera singer, so I think we sort of share.
Oh, there you go.
Some musical roots.
Right in the. Yeah. That's in the same wheelhouse. My dad used to say, "If it's got drums, it ain't country music."
I've heard that. I've also told people, "Get your bass amp off my riser. I'm setting my drums up." So.
Yeah. Right.
So. You seem to have gotten pretty deeply into music as a young man, and then moved to Boston. Was that move like? Was it like, Boston's where the music's at, or was it like I have friends in Boston? What precipitated that move?
Well, I was in art school in New York, State University of New York at Purchase, SUNY Purchase.
Yeah.
Really, really great art school. Still is great art school.
Uh-huh.
And senior year, there was a visiting professor. I took a class from him. He was from Boston. And at the end of the year, he just made a blanket announcement, like, if anybody wants a job, I need people to. He did like large scale architectural installations, where he tried to get public improvisation and music into architectural spaces using light beams that people would break and make trigger synthesizers to make sounds and stuff. So they were, he needed to have models made. He needed to have site plans drawn up. He needed to ship art around the world. So he needed somebody to do that kind of stuff. So me and the drummer in my band said, yeah, we'll go. We had no plans for after college, so we just went to Boston.
Yeah.
And took a stab in the dark, really, and just kind of landed there, had nowhere to live, lived on people's floors for a while, and finally he and I ended up challenging ourselves to see how little rent we could pay, and we ended up staying together in one room in a punk rock house in the worst part of town and paying $75 each for rent a month. So
outstanding.
Yeah, they were lean times. But so, Boston was just an invitation from the teacher.
I guess that was Bunratty's time then, right? Was the Was the Mid East open yet?
Oh yeah, Middle East. Not downstairs, but upstairs. Downstairs was a bowling alley.
Yeah.
Where I was actually in a candlepin league for a while.
Oh, you bowl?
And yeah, I do. My dad and I used to bowl when I was a kid, so I caught the bug. It's a satisfying sport. It's an interesting sport because there's a lot of mental trickery going on. I find that if I get upset or if I get uptight, my game goes totally south. But if I literally stand up there with the ball and I say, I love you. And I love the ball. I love the lane. I love the pins. I just love you. And then I just bowl a strike. It's amazing. It's a total, for me, it's this mind game.
I'm sort of, that's percolating down through my brain right now as I consider, what is that relationship? Why is that calming and centering and focusing?
Yeah, I do qigong and some meditation and some yoga every day in some combination, and so I don't know. Maybe that's my little bowling meditation moment where I'm trying to use bowling as a way to. It's like a challenge that is presenting itself, and I have a choice. I can either bang my head against it, or I can allow it to be part of me, and then, accept whatever outcome happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I've applied that. I mean, globally, I've definitely applied that to my musical life. I am not the person who's going to, I just got an email from the Recording Academy saying I'm being considered for a Grammy for my latest album, Caspar album. And at the same time, I started getting an avalanche of emails from other artists who also are under consideration saying, vote for me, check out my record. And I just don't feel like doing any of that.
Yeah.
as an experiment, I've done no promotion for Caspar Babypants beyond play shows that people invite me to play. I don't actually generate shows. And then make the music as good as it can be so that it does the work for me, and put all my energy there rather than in trumpeting my message around. I mean, I'll use social media occasionally to promote a show or say, hey, my new record's out. But I'm not organized.
Right.
And I think some of that is that idea that I have to, this is a big, complicated system that I'm dancing around in and banging my head against it and trying to control it and trying to achieve specific goals is a big invitation for disappointment. And there's so much you can't control about how you are perceived and how your music finds its way through people's lives, that for me, being super hands-off and just trusting that it's all going to work out the way it's supposed to, you know, the old no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should thing, is a lot more relaxing and realistic and peaceful.
Yeah, you know, the person who turned me on to Caspar Babypants is a fellow musician and dad. And like, it wasn't that I discovered it through social media or through some kind of promotions campaign. It was that somebody handed me a disc and said, "This is great. Your kid's going to love this.
That's it.
And you're going to like it
too."
That's
the only kind of promotion I trust, is one parent to another.
Yeah.
That's the stuff.
So you worked in Boston with some guys who eventually joined the band Morphine, and Morphine wasn't really like, the band was heavy. There was a heavy emotional undercurrent to it, and there was a heavy drug vibe, and I don't pick that up from anything else that you've done. Was that sort of a coalescing scene at the time, or was that something that you dabbled in? Or?
Well, it was more, that experience was more about Mark Sandman as a collaborator and Mark became like my musical father, really. He showed me, you know, he played a 2-string slide bass, and he had a version in his loft that was a 2-string you could actually finger instead of playing with slide, because the strings were really high on his version. And he had a guitar version that he was experimenting with, and I picked it up and I just went, oh yeah, this is it. I was like, Mark, what is this? He's like, that's a bass guitar. And I said, this is my jam. So he showed me the way and, you know, let me live with him because I was kind of homeless. And that was a big deal. He's a very private person. And, you know, he really let me into his world and taught me an incredible amount, especially performing with him. You know, our band Supergroup made up all the songs live on the spot. So it was a big risk. You know, it was like Indiana Jones in that second movie where he steps off the ledge and the bridge appears because he stepped off the ledge, and it was kind of like that. So Morphine was a going concern when I met Mark, and then I lived with him on and off for a couple of years, and we did Supergroup together and co-wrote songs and collaborated and jammed endlessly. And, you know, Mark smoked a lot of weed, but it wasn't about heavy drugs for him at all. And I don't think the music was particularly druggy as much as it was kind of like noir narratives, you know, sort of, I don't know, you know, how could I describe it? Like, you know, dark paperback, Pulp Fiction type scenarios that he liked to sort of paint with lyrics and with the sound of the music. It was more about dark narratives than drugs, and more about people's weaknesses, kind of. And I guess drugs are one of those, but you know, emotional weaknesses and dark corners of psyches. That's what I was getting out of his.
Morphine always sounded to me kind of like the soundtrack for a noir gangster film set somewhere in the future.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of a Blade Runner.
Yeah, it had this electronic element to it, so it wasn't in any way jazz, but it was also like it was informed by like wrought iron architecture and Gothic. Like it had elements to it that I thought were weirdly kind of almost 30s-ish. But
yeah.
Are you familiar with Ricky Wilson's guitar in the B-52s before so Ricky Wilson was the original guitar player for the B-52s, and he had a setup.
Oh, yeah.
He had a dyad tuning on the bottom 2 strings, 2 empty slots on the neck, and then 2 top strings tuned to a different chord. And so he would play bass on those bottom 2 strings and sort of those kind of either accents or sort of proto leads on the top 2 strings. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, and weirdly, that's how my brother plays guitar.
Really?
He adopted the three-string thing from me, and it's not exactly how he does it, but he takes the low bass string and puts it where it's supposed to be, kind of like where the lowest string would be on a guitar. Then there's 3 blank spots and then 2 strings. And it took me years of jamming with him to realize that he had tuned them the same way I had, because he's doing this weird reach around with his thumb and fingering with his other 2 fingers. I kind of got him set up now in a more traditional 3-string way, which is where you put the 3 in the middle of the neck. But yeah, he was totally doing that B-52 style without knowing what he was doing. He was just, cobbling it together.
Yeah, the crazy thing about the B-52s, especially I have friends who play with Cindy Wilson and her solo project, and I have a friend who's out on the road right now with the B-52s and their road crew, is that band sort of sprang up purely organically from people who were like they were not trained. Like those crazy 2/3 of the Andrews sisters harmonies that those 2 women sang were like worked out in their dorm room. They didn't sing in church or any of the things you'd expect. So it's kind of wildly organic and cool. But
well, apparently I heard a story. Rock Lobster was something Ricky was jamming on at home.
Yes,
and they came over and he was laughing because he was like, "This is the most ridiculous riff. It's so cartoonish and silly."
Right.
And they were all like, "That's awesome. Let's make something out of that."
Yeah. I think the exact quote is, "I just wrote the dumbest riff of all time."
Yeah, there you go. I love that.
Yeah, it's wild because if you spend any time around them, like Fred has like this insanely encyclopedic memory of rock music and like just a encyclopedic knowledge of rock history, and he's got an undergraduate degree, and I think it's something like forestry from the University of Georgia, and was pursuing a master's in journalism or something. Like, he's a really brilliant guy, and they're all amazing people. But yeah,
I got way too drunk with Fred in 1996. So
where were you? Do you remember?
We were in Washington, D.C. doing a WHF festival. It was a big radio show.
Yeah.
And presidents were on the bill, and Fred Schneider was doing a solo thing, and No Doubt was there, and the Foo Fighters, and
wow.
We all went back to this hotel, and the hotel's kind of famous. I've seen it since in movies. It had like a watery or like a lagoon of water, like there was about 1.5 foot deep in the lobby. It's like one of those open lobbies with the rooms around the lobby going up, you know.
Yeah.
And there was a piano, there's a grand piano out in the lagoon, and I got pretty hammered. Dave Grohl's cousin kept giving me vodka with sugar. He'd like pour sugar in it, and then he was calling that some sort of drink, and I was like, what? So I drank a bunch of that, and then I stormed out through the lagoon to the piano, and the security had to come and haul me off, and then I did it again. I just kept going back out. And I spilled a big tray of drinks on a very important journalist, and I just talked Dave Grohl's ear off about some crazy rock and roll circus idea I had, and Fred was there, although I don't remember if we actually conversed, but he seemed like a top-notch human being from my vodka haze.
Yeah, lovely guy.
Yeah.
You were making music in Boston, doing visual art, and this sounds like you're doing some pretty like heavy grunt work for your former professor too, and then made your way out to Los Angeles.
No, actually, then I woke up one morning in a cold January Boston day, and I said, what am I doing? I was super unhealthy. I was eating all the wrong things. I was drinking too much. I was completely sick, and woke up one day and said, wait, I'm from Seattle. I need to go home. So I bought a friend's van and lived in the van and went across country real slow. I had to go south because the van had no heat. So I went all the way down to Highway 10 and went across because I could get some warmth.
Yeah. Now that's all the way south.
Yeah.
Did you pick it up in Florida?
I think so. I don't really remember. I think I did go all the way down to Florida before I started heading west. Yeah. I was freezing. I'll never forget there was a rest stop in Virginia that had a fire going, and it was so hard for me to leave that rest area because I was like, I got to get back in my cold van. Anyway, I go back to Seattle, and the joy and the relief of being home was so great that I wrote a ton of songs and modified a bunch of songs that I had written in Boston, and kind of those songs became the Presidents.
Right.
And the Presidents had already formed and started and made a demo tape that we were selling at the bar where our drummer worked. When I met Beck in Seattle, I was introduced to him through a mutual friend, and we hit it off immediately, and I ended up jumping on stage with him at his second show in Seattle. He did he was doing like a solo kind of thing, ramping up to get ready to make a record, and he needed band members for his touring situation. So I ended up going to Olympia and playing on his album One Foot in the Grave, playing slide guitar, which I had no idea how to play. He needed a slide guitarist to do the of Loser.
Yeah.
So I said, yeah, I can do it. And I didn't own a guitar that I could do that on. So I had to go to the music store and buy a guitar, buy a slide. And I went to the bus station and I went down to Olympia and I went into Calvin Johnson's basement. And they said, play slide on this song, which I'd never heard. And I just started to hunt and peck. And I guess it was good enough because a couple of days later he called me and said, do you want to be in my band and go on tour? And I said, sure thing. So I moved down to LA at that point because I was the only band member not from Los Angeles. So Beck let me live with him, and we wrote songs together and 4-track together and bounced around LA talking about the challenges of his opportunity that was coming at him to, be in the big leagues, so to speak.
There's two things I want to ask you about. First of all, was that Calvin from Beat Happening in Olympia? K Records,
yes.
Calvin? I didn't know he was part of the Beck sort of story.
Oh yeah. So when Beck signed to Geffen, he had a clause in his contract which allowed him to put out, I don't know if it was an exact number, but it was like 5 records on other small labels at the same time. So he put out, when Mellow Gold came out, I think like 4 other records came out on smaller labels. So that was his K label album.
I saw Beck at South by Southwest right before that. He played with Roger Manning, who was the sort of alt folk guy from Greenwich Village, and I was a big fan of Roger Manning. And I went to see him, and he invited Beck up on stage, and Beck started the song with a guitar and switched to leaf blower at some point, and it was very, very Dadaist and confrontational. And after it was over, I think that I was playing with someone that night, and I was moving drums, and I sort of bumped into him in the hall, and I was like, man, that was really silly. And I meant that as a compliment. He did not take it as a compliment.
No. I mean, he and I had different approaches to live performance for sure.
Yeah.
At the time, Loser was blowing up, and he really didn't like that song that much. He didn't think highly of it, and didn't want to be known as a generational, the spokesperson of a slacker generation kind of thing, which is how the press, of course, was trying to sell his deal.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons he signed with Geffen was because he loved Sonic Youth and wanted to sort of, cultivate more of a Sonic Youth Jr. kind of vibe live, where it was, chaotic and crazy. I liked that to an extent, but I'm more like deliver the melodies, give people riffs, give them hooks, give them visuals that they can grab onto and walk out of the club with. Like, I want to give gifts more than challenge. So in the end, one day Beck kind of asked me to tone down the joy, and I was like, I gotta go. I got to get back to my my joyful little rock band.
Yeah.
So I did 2 tours with him though, and lived with him a little bit there. So it was kind of like going to Fame School. It was like I got to stand next to the eye of the hurricane that he was experiencing, and then 5-6 months later, I got to stand in my own hurricane and deal with it. So it was very instructive.
I was at some diner in I guess what's now Silver Lake in L.A., and they had Beck's dishwashing gloves nailed to the wall as a shrine, because he worked for a living. He wasn't just some like celebrity kid who got swept up. Like, he had been a dishwasher at this cafe. How did you and I have talked a little bit before I started recording about this sort of weird, like, narcissistic Venus flytrap of fame, but what was your perception sort of standing on the sidelines of watching Beck kind of his life change? Did it feel like a positive thing?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I admired his kind of perspective on it. He decided not to squander the opportunity, to really dig in, to, like, he stopped smoking pot, he stopped drinking, he stopped, sort of thinking of himself as going nowhere, and saw this wide open doorway and decided to really, like, pay attention and wake up and educate himself. My image of him on that first van tour we did is him in the back of the van reading Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States, kind of like absorbing culture, opening his eyes, kind of taking it all in. So that was, I really admired his perspective on that.
What year did you say that was?
That was spring of '94. I think I went down in January of '94 to rehearse for the first tour, and so it went from January through like April or so, the whole experience.
And then Kurt Cobain died, what, April of '94? Is that right?
Yep, and I'll never forget that because Beck and I both got pneumonia on tour. We were adding shows. So the first tour, they booked us in these tiny little places thinking, oh, it'll make a buzz. There'll be a line around the block and everything. But we'd get there and all these people would be sad because it was so sold out. So we would add a second show. And Beck just gave everything he had on stage. And I was too. I was jumping around, sweating and getting hot and getting cold. And we both got pneumonia. So we found out that Kurt Cobain died while we were at the waiting room at the hospital. And it was a weird memory because Beck and I both got seen by the doctor at the same time. And so we're sitting on the little table in the room, kind of like little kids, like, when you take your 2 kids in to see the pediatrician, see them at the same time. It was funny. Yeah. It was like we were so sick and skinny and white and little and weird, and Kurt Cobain was dead, and we're sitting in these hospital gowns. Like, it was a low ebb that day for sure.
So it wasn't too long after that you sort of fled back to Seattle.
Yeah. Well, Jason, the drummer, called me one day and he's like, "Look, we're selling like hundreds of these tapes over the bar. You need to come home." And it coincided with me kind of feeling like, all right, I've tried to be atonal and grungy for long enough. I need to get back to
Christopher mode.
my joy pop, or my funge, as we call it now.
Yeah. What do you call it now?
Well, we call it funge.
Oh, like
it's fun.
Fun grunge.
Yeah, fun grunge.
Yeah.
Yeah, funge. We could, but I only came up with that like 2 years ago. Yeah, funge, man.
What bar is it Chris, your drummer?
Jason.
Jason. Where was he working?
The Comet Tavern in Seattle.
I haven't been there. I've played the Crocodile.
And that was one of our home bases in Seattle. We loved the Crocodile and Mo. Those were our 2 home bases. So
Presidents has this like cassette you guys have made back when bands did that, and he was just selling a gazillion of them across the bar, and those were the songs that you wrote when you first got back from Boston.
Yeah, or songs that I wrote in Boston that were sort of precursors to the President's thing. So yeah, it was a 13-song tape that we made maybe it's 13? I can't remember. Anyway, It was something like that. 12 songs that we recorded in like 13 hours at a studio in Seattle that actually ended up being it was the laundry room, and that's where Dave Grohl ended up making the first Foo Fighters record with Barrett Jones at the helm. So Barrett had some deal going. He's like $500 or maybe it was $300 for 12 hours in the studio. And so we did that, and we didn't have the money to pay for that. A guy that ran a local club gave us the money just out of the goodness of his heart because he loved the band. So he called me out for lunch one day, and he's like, all right, I'm writing you a check. You got to go make a demo. So,
and I remember
that was cool.
Those kind of things happening in the 90s when you're a struggling musician and somebody drops what seems like now, as a homeowner, like I had to pay more than that to get the chimney to stop leaking here in heavy rainstorms.
Oh, I know.
But back then it just seemed like the hand of God in your life. Like, here's $300, which was like, I'm never going to sue $300 at the same time all in one place that I haven't already promised to my landlord ever.
Yeah. I know. It's crazy. Yeah, it was Evan Blackstone was his name. He ran a valet parking company and booked a rock club, and he was a victim of road rage one day. Somebody almost ran him off the road, and it shook him up so much that he decided to put positivity out in the world as a sort of pushback against the negativity of that driver, and that's why he wrote us the check. So if it weren't for road rage, we would not have become successful.
Huh. That's a really cool story. So you reunite with Jason, and you guys start playing shows again.
Yep.
And word gets out, as word does.
Yeah, well, it was a fertile environment. Grunge, Kurt Cobain, of course, had passed away, but everybody was going out every night to look for the next big thing, So you could book a show on a Monday night at the Croc, and it was full because it was just full anyway. So we got a lot of eyeballs on us without really trying very hard,
Yeah.
And we put a lot of work into our craft, and we put a lot of joy and energy into our live show. We had a rule where if we looked down at the set list and one of us didn't feel 100% excited to play a certain song, we would get rid of it and trust that a better one would bubble up in its place. And so we were relentless with that rule. And, so that joy came across, and people loved it and became addicted to it. And then Jason, because he was a bartender and he was also booking at Mo, he just decided one day, let's book the band, every weekend for 2 months and see what happens, see if people get sick of us. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger.
This is an argument I've had with so many new bands. I make records for young bands sometimes, and I'm always like, you should get a residency and play somewhere every week. And they're like, oh, we don't want to burn our crowd out in town. I'm like, it doesn't work like that. If you're good and people enjoy your music, they'll come back next week because they do serve beer at that bar, if I'm not mistaken. And
yeah,
and
exactly.
Yeah,
nobody gets enough of that.
Right. Well, man, that's a whole other discussion. But
right.
So let me ask: at this point, the President of the United States of America is building a solid following. You're honing your set down to the songs that you all love. Was there an idea in your mind at that point, like, we want to be an internationally acclaimed touring pop act, or were you like, this is really fun, let's keep doing this?
Well, I have a distinct memory of Dave and I getting into his car. Dave is a guitar player. And as we're getting into his car, I'm looking over the hood at him, and he says to me, if a major label wanted to come along and pay us a bunch of money to sing these songs all over the world, I would totally do it. And I thought in my mind, you're insane. Nobody's going to pay a lot of money for us to play these silly songs all over the world. But I said, me too. So I remember that moment where I was like, you're nuts. And then we played a showcase during a weekend where there's a festival in Seattle called Bumbershoot, and all these industry people were in town, and they'd all kind of caught a buzz about us, and we played an ASCAP showcase. And I didn't know this, but there were 7 major label reps in the audience, and we just did our usual silly, chaotic, nutball show. And the next day, we had 7 major label offers.
How did those come in? I guess there was no email at that time.
Yeah. I don't know if by that time, that was late summer 94, so I think, or summer, no, when was that? That was early summer 94. At some point we hired a manager.
Yeah.
Stacy Slater in Los Angeles.
Uh-huh.
And I don't remember the chronology, man. It's too fuzzy.
Yeah. No.
But that's a good question because, these days, of course, your phone would light up, but,
right.
Phones didn't light up back then.
Yeah, maybe Stacy got all those calls. I remember, just parenthetically, having an amazing show with my band once and expecting for our manager to get calls. It was a South by, and it was a big deal, and it was sold out, and the fire marshal shut it down. And so that was kind of how you expected to get the news. Like, you'd go on to the next show, and you'd call your manager from a payphone or a hotel room phone. And,
I know. And I remember being on tour, and you had to, pull over and call the club for directions.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And you'd get the bar back who didn't know. He's like, it's just downtown.
Yeah, I ride my bike here, so... Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. What you want to do is get in the bike lane.
Right.
And
right.
Anyway, I thought about that when I watched all of Seinfeld's, the whole series of seasons when it came up on Netflix or something. Mm-hmm. And I immediately realized, whoa, if cell phones existed, these would be very short episodes.
Right. Right.
Be like, I'm just going to text Elaine and tell her I'm not coming to the movies tonight instead of, I got to go down to the movie theater and find her,
Yeah. It was a different world.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, the argument could be made that it's better now, certainly for things like making dinner plans, but there's also times when I kind of miss sitting across the table from somebody and hearing all about their life as opposed to making these short, almost Dewey Decimal references to things they put on social media over the last 6 months because I saw it all on Facebook,
Yeah. Well, I've heard a very solid argument for the fact that cell phones do not detract from personal connection, that they only enhance it. Yeah. I mean, it's not like everybody sitting on the bus was having a party, 20 years ago. They were all reading their books or staring silently out the window.
Yeah.
Now they're on their phones, talking, communicating, sending pictures. You can argue for sure that people are better connected in a more positive way now. It sort of gets vilified, but I don't think it really does. I don't know if it really deserves that. I think it shines a light on the positive and the negative equally, so that we're more aware of. But people like to tell their sad stories, so the negative part gets a little more attention because our egos want to tell sad stories, so we commiserate and we're not alone.
So you get 7 major label offers.
Yeah, and then we got to get a lawyer first. So we interviewed a bunch of lawyers, went to L.A., did that whole thing, hired a lawyer, David Cotico, and started fielding offers and going around to these labels and talking to the people and meeting them. And finally we whittled it down to Columbia, which is a part of Sony.
Yeah.
Or Maverick, which was Madonna's label.
Yeah.
Madonna came to see us a couple times, and she did the whole stand in the back with the big sunglasses and the baseball hat thing. It might as well have been a neon sign, famous person.
Right.
So we ended up, getting in deep with those two, and had business meeting with Madonna, and she really understood what we were all about. She understood that it was a craft, what we did, but she also cautioned me kind of after the meeting. She kind of took me aside and said, hey, if you don't sign with me, I just want to give you a piece of advice. Your music is fun and funny, and so you're never going to get critical acclaim for it. You will never get, recognized for your craft. So don't expect it, and just tend to your people that love you and ignore the rest. And so I actually really took that to heart, and she saved me a lot of grief.
Yeah, how would you describe your mindset going into this process? Are you like this sort of wide-eyed? You've already seen Beck blow up, right? From the passenger seat. So
yeah.
But also, at this point, I saw this tweet the other day that said, you can say a lot of things about Gen X, but at this point it's hard to discount the fact that we distrusted everything.
Well, that pretty sums it up. I did not trust it at all. I thought any second during the entire process, even after we got signed and we're on tour, I felt like I was going to get tapped on the shoulder, and it would be the maitre d' saying, "I'm sorry, sir, but there's been a problem. You don't actually have an invitation. You need to leave."
Yeah.
Like I was underdressed at this fancy party, metaphorically, shoving shrimp in my face as fast as possible before I get the boot. So in that sense, it felt very unsafe,
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to reconcile, because this is something that, although I had put a lot of energy into defining success previous to all this happening, as I write a song, I record the song on my 4-track, I make a little tape, I sell it out of my bag at my shows or on the street where I busk,
right,
and I am successful. Done. It's
right.
a totally closed loop. I have my job to pay the bills, and it's a dumb job, and I want a dumb job so I can put my energy into this.
Mm-hmm.
So then, but secretly in the back of my mind, I'm thinking as I do that, but it would be really great to hit the big time and, be in the show and see what that's like. So when it actually finally came along, I couldn't help but have expectations of the classic version of achieving success and fame, which is this metaphorical room you get into, like the coveted room, the velvet rope and the door are opened, and you get in, and you think before you walk into that room, in that room, everything's cool, everything's great. I'm with all the cool people, and I'm relaxed, and I'm done, I've achieved it, it's over, the struggle's over. Versus the reality of sort of emotionally walking into that room of success, which is the immediate, obvious sort of thing that hit me was, oh, there's another door into another room inside that room. And then I knew there was another room in that room, and there was another door, and there was another room, and another door, and another room, and another door. And it was like a never-ending succession of reproving and feeling unsafe and having so many other forces and people and factors and fingers in your pie that I immediately wanted to back out of the first room and run away. And I actually brought up to the guys in the band, let's just break up now. Let's just pull a Sex Pistols and just freeze ourselves in this perfect state. Because I also knew deep down that I didn't really want to be in a loud rock and roll band. I knew I wanted to do something a little more kind of nuanced and involve a lot more styles of music than just guitar, bass, drums, vocals.
Mm-hmm.
So I pitched them on breaking up, and they didn't want to do that. And it was, for me, I didn't have the wherewithal to just say, okay, I'm out. So I just decided, well, I have my reservations, but I'm going to ride the pony, because the pony is pooping gold bricks, and I'm going to hold on for dear life and see what happens. So I did, and the feeling of being unsafe really never went away, unfortunately, and it was very, very stressful. It was like the simple life that spawned the songs, the joy of moving back to Seattle, reconnecting with friends, aimless days of playing Frisbee in the park and having a barbecue in the evening and not knowing how the day was going to unfold. And I'm getting goosebumps talking about how great those days were.
Yeah.
Those were all gone. And it's replaced by airplanes, airports, buses, tour buses, vans, backstages, hotel rooms, which don't spark joy and made me feel sad. And I had just, gotten married, and my son was born in 97, and I was doing other things. And so, it's like that old John Lennon quote. Somebody asked him when the Beatles were at the height of their touring and going around Europe, and they're like, "Hey, John, how was Sweden?" And he's like, "It was a room and a car and a room and a car and a room and a car and a cheese sandwich."
Yeah.
That's basically what it was.
Playing at that level, buses and stages that were built for one night and then taken down, is the only time I've ever been yelled at by a complete stranger for longer than it took for them to get away from me on the highway. Like, those are the only times where I've had to sit in a room and have a stage manager or someone just unload on me because of situations that were outside of my control. But I think that when you get to that level, there's no real roadmap. There's only been X number of bands, and it's not a completely insignificant number. There are hundreds of bands that have toured at that level, but it's not like, a 9 to 5 where you stop at Starbucks and get a coffee, and then you come into the office and you check your email, and you know what time you're going to go to lunch, and you know what time your meeting is in middle afternoon, and you go home, and like everyone's sort of making it up. It's the first day every day touring at that level, and people lose their minds sometimes. There's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of money on the line, and if you're the performer, you've got an obligation. There are people waiting for you to get up there and do your thing. And man, for me, it manifests as some sort of severe anxiety. It sounds like you sort of had a little bit of that too.
Oh yeah, definitely. It was all on my shoulders. If I got sick, the whole thing fell apart. And of course, I got sick a lot because I was not eating right and I was stressed out and all that. But then, the flip side of that was I did love some stuff about it. I loved setting up in the afternoon, the sound check, the atmosphere. It was like setting up the circus.
Yeah.
And I often would just stand and watch the activity and just be like, oh, wow, this is so cool. I wrote some songs, and now all this shit is happening so that we can present them to these people in St. Louis tonight or wherever we were, London. I loved that aspect of it. But, really was aesthetics. Like, I was driven to do something else musically. And, once we became successful, like in the early days of the band, the presentation of the Presidents was dorks trying to rock. So we're playing these 2-string and 3-string guitars.
Yeah.
We're quoting, like, I have this song I wrote sounds like the Buzzcocks. This song sounds like Kiss. This song sounds like AC/DC. I'm writing these songs that are sort of quoting or kind of pulling a page from hard rock stuff and funky stuff and all over the map. But playing them on a 2-string and a 3-string sounds totally fresh and new. But so I think the audience's experience in the early days was, oh, look at those dorks try to rock. Go, little dorks, yay.
Right.
And they kind of wanted to, put us in their back pocket and take us home with them. And then when we became super successful and we're standing up in front of 30,000 people in the Netherlands on an abandoned racetrack, we can't be the little dorks trying to rock. We actually have to rock because there's somebody way back there that we need to reach, And even the first people in front are like 20 yards away because of the giant media pit and the, barricades and all that. So the nature of the band changed and it turned into more of a rock band. And I didn't want to be in a rock band. I found that aesthetically frustrating and kind of boring. So anyway, I started hunting on the side to try to figure out what this other thing is that I wanted to do. And eventually to make a long story short, after 15, 20 years of hunting, I found Caspar Babypants. I found kids music and felt completely I feel so at home in this world that the volcano of, I mean, with the Presidents, I had a hard time writing songs for the band because the chemistry between innocence and innuendo made those songs work. And I couldn't repeat that. But with Caspar, it's all innocence, and that is me and actually who I am. And so the volcano of creativity just continues to explode.
Yeah, man. I mean, and so the first Giraffes record comes out in what, 1998?
Yeah, I put that out right after, 1998. We played our last show, quote unquote, our first last show.
First last show, yeah.
First last show at the Paramount on July 31st, 1998, I happen to remember. Mm-hmm. And then I think I put that record out right after that, yeah.
Yeah. And so, and this is sort of beginning to explore your Beatles side that, and more just melodic, less bashy music. And eventually,
yeah, and more kind of psychedelic and weird, and throwing a lot of different textures in, strings and horns and synthesizers and stuff like that. Yeah, but it was a stab in the dark, the Giraffe stuff. I didn't really know what I was trying to do or what my voice was, or you know, what I was trying to say. So,
but then fatherhood, I guess, to some extent, and certainly this desire to make music that brings joy, sparks joy, leads you to this amazing, as you called it, volcano of creativity with all the Caspar Babypants stuff.
Yeah. It was, I wanted to get off the road. I wanted, the other aspect of the President's experience, getting signed and everything, was the pressure to, like I said, that room inside a room, inside a room, inside a room. Even though I didn't want to go in there, I went in there. And so, the pressure to repeat and perform and reprove yourself, we were not immune from, and it was very stressful. And with kids' music, I don't feel any of that. There's no such thing as a hit in kids' music.
Right.
There's no such thing as the culture of cool, or being the hot flavor of the month, or dominating the internet, which is the new airwaves. There's none of that at all. No, I'm completely free. I'm free of all judgment and relative coolness. So,
did you have doubts though? Like pulling out of this machine must have been, at least on some level, kind of terrifying.
Oh yeah, it was totally hard because a lot of people depended on it coming along. And the first time I quit very emotionally and abruptly, and it wasn't pretty. And then the second time in 2015, I did a lot of therapy. I figured out some things. I'm a fixer, and that's simultaneously the source of my greatest strength and my greatest weakness. The greatest strength is I want to fix the world with music, so I pour all that joy in there to help people feel better. The weakness part is that in my interpersonal relationships, I have a hard time figuring out what I want and then expressing it and saying no when somebody presents me with something I don't want.
Right.
So on a small scale, it's a liability, and on a large scale, it's a benefit. So having figured that out, I went to the other guys and sort of said, okay, I'd been doing Caspar and the Presidents for 6 years at the same time. And it was just too much. And I was like, I got to stop jumping around and screaming. I need to stay home, do this. And I gave them 3 years of warning. 3 years before we quit for real, I sat them down and said, it's coming. Here it comes. I'm going to give you guys 3 years notice.
So that July 31st, 1998 show, was it planned as the first last show, or was it, like you said just now, that it was kind of abrupt and personal and there was some anger, and at least that's what I'm reading into it. Did you know that was your last show when you walked out on stage, or was there a moment at the end of the show where you were like, I don't want to do this anymore?
No, we knew. It was billed as our farewell show. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we were broken up for 5 years, although in that 5 years we made a record called Freaked Out and Small that we licensed to a company, and then we formed a band with Sir Mix-a-Lot and called Subset, which I was just listening to yesterday, and it is awesome. I could not believe how good it is. I forgot about it, and iTunes, I had my iTunes on random, and the song by Subset popped up, and I started listening to more of it, and it kind of blew my mind. I'm sad that we never officially released that stuff. Mix-a-Lot always, every time I run into him, he talks about wanting to release it, and I'm behind that, but I don't know what we're going to do with it. Anyway, so during that 5 years, we weren't sitting on our asses for some reason. We kept, working together. But we always said no to presidents' reunions. People were always asking, and throwing money at us, and we're like, no. And it was actually Chris Novoselic from Nirvana who asked us to be his backup band at an award ceremony where he was getting kind of a lifetime achievement type award. And he wanted us to play a couple President songs with him. And that was the first time we all looked at each other and said, you know what, it might be time.
Yeah.
So we did that. And then it felt really good. And then we booked a show on New Year's Eve, 2002 at the Crocodile. And it was awesome. It was so great because it was like being in the world's best President's cover band. It felt like it had been 5 years since we played those songs, so I got a space between me and that previous experience.
Yeah.
And the second time I got to really like take a deep breath and enjoy our achievements, enjoy the music, almost as if I didn't create it, and then really like watch, because we weren't doing ginormous shows yet when we first got back together. So watching the crowd and being kind of, eyeball to eyeball with the fans again was really energizing. And then we made another record called Love Everybody. And then Dave quit the band. He decided it wasn't for him. And we got Andrew in, and then Andrew was with us for the next 12 years. Yeah. So, we had a really substantial second act and put out some great music and toured all over the world and did it at a slower pace. You know, we do like little jaunts out here and there. We started out with weekends, and so it was sustainable. But finally, it was time to kind of put a lid on it and kind of move on. And so that the last show, I did not tell anybody it was the last show.
Yeah.
Only I knew it was the last show at the very, it was in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, at an outdoor festival. And inside my body, I knew it was the last show, but the band didn't. I always felt a little bad about that. I should have told them, but I don't know. I didn't want to create drama.
Yeah. Yeah. You seem to have this recurring theme in your life of this sort of jump and the net will appear.
Yeah, it's true. Well, and I do that because my goal is to make the music. I would make the music and search for the sounds and do the work, whether it was successful or not. So I think it becomes popular and successful because I pour so much energy into it that I think people get some of that energy back when they listen, Yeah. And the energy is probably what they're after more than the song. Somewhere in there is my joy, and that's the thing that really makes people feel good.
Yeah. Well, I usually wind these interviews up with a series of 10 questions that are based loosely on the questions at the end of Inside the Actor's Studio. But they're my own questions, and they're because everybody kind of has preconceived notions about how they would answer those questions. If you're ready for that, we can jump in.
Fire away.
Okay, first question. What is the fondest memory you have of a meal that you've had?
The fondest memory of a meal. Oh, man. I went to Japan to meet my wife, who was on a tour, not a music tour, but she was on a art tour in Japan.
Yeah, she's a collage maker, right?
She's a collage artist. Her name's Kate Endel. And I went to meet her at the end of her tour, and we were going to go on our own little tour around. I was a day early, and I was jet lagged. I just arrived. I was all messed up from the long flight. and I went to a little restaurant in the basement of the hotel and got this bowl of ramen that had this sort of golden, oily, curry, buttery broth, and it nourished every molecule in my body. So that was it. That's my favorite one.
Man, I'm a big ramen fan.
Oh, baby.
One of the bands that I play with, they're in Japan right now because their visa ran out and they're getting a new visa and coming back. They're called Pinky Doodle Poodle, and
oh, nice.
Yeah,
that's a great name.
Yeah, they're so great. I'll send you a link. It may be the best band I've ever been in. Don't tell my other bands.
Okay.
There's super exciting band. Occasionally we go to a city where there's a substantial Japanese community, and we get to have a meal somewhere, and love it.
Yeah.
So the second question is, what is the most frightened you've ever been?
Ooh, most frightened I've ever been. That's an interesting question. I mean, in the traditional sense, frightened, like scared. There's a movie called The Changeling with George C. Scott from the 70s. It's a ghost story about a little child who's a ghost. And, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. I don't really like scary movies at all, but I like this scary movie, or this ghost story. And there was a time when we were on tour, and I was losing my voice, and we were on our way to Portland, Oregon to do 2 nights in a row. Miraculously, a water main burst, and the first show was canceled, which I needed to have that show canceled like you would not believe. I could barely speak. I sat in the dark hotel room watching The Changeling that night with just shivers going up and down my body. I was so freaked out, so frightened. So that's literal frightened. Being sort of more globally frightened was getting signed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of responsibility that comes along with that. I remember when we got our deal memo for our major label deal with one of the bands that I was in, and my girlfriend at the time was jumping around the kitchen, waving it over her head, like, this is amazing. You guys are going to get a major label deal. And she was so excited, and I was sitting there in a chair staring at my coffee thinking, what does this mean? How is this going to change my life? And it's interesting because it was exactly as you described, a room inside a room inside a room, and there was this promise that, the next room is going to be awesome. This room kind of sucks.
Yeah. Right.
And then when we bagged it and stopped, there was always this thought in the back of my mind until just a few years ago, like, man, we quit before it got good. And I think that the realization that you make at some point is that it ain't all it's cracked up to be. Like, at the center of that Russian doll is a lot of regret. So.
Yeah, or a little lump of poo. Yeah. The tricky thing is, I mean, the big deal is we are sold. The culture sells us on this idea that fame is a big solution to your problems, or that money's a solution to your problems. I mean, if you're no good with $10, you're going to be no good with $10 million. I mean, look at MC Hammer. How the hell does that guy squander $60 million on racehorses?
Yeah.
So I remember being a little kid and being aware of child actors and thinking, ooh, and sometimes they'd crash and burn. I'd be like, man, if I ever become successful or famous or rich or whatever, that's not going to happen to me.
Yeah.
I'm going to be frugal. So anyway.
Yeah.
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 It's tricky, man, because everybody thinks it's going to solve all your problems, and it's just not. And nobody wants to hear somebody in my position, though, say that, because then the gut reaction they have is, oh, whiny rock star,
Yeah, nobody wants to hear you complain. It's very frustrating.
Yeah. But I think it'll slowly make its way down the chain if we keep talking about it.
That's part of the goal of the show, is to sort of help people understand that playing music for a living is a job like any other job, and there's days that suck, and there's days that are absolutely unbelievably bad, and then there's also days that are good, just like any good day at work. But I used to work on computers for people who had experienced a level of success that they were very well known, and part of the reason that I did that is because I had the computer skill that I developed after my major label deal went away, and because people trusted me and knew I wasn't going to abuse their information. So I would have these very personal interactions with people of a certain like level of celebrity. And I was sitting there and the news was on. I was working on this famous person's computer, and getting their email fixed or whatever it was I was doing, making their printer work. It was something simple like that. And the news that Winona Ryder had been arrested for shoplifting came on the radio, or the television or whatever it was. And I was like, what on earth? Why is Winona Ryder shoplifting? Like, it was absolutely baffling to me. And this extremely successful, famous person turned completely sideways in their chair so they could look me in the eye and said, becoming rich and famous only solves one problem, and that is the problem of not having enough money.
Right.
Every other problem, it turns to 11. So it was really interesting conversation.
Oh yeah, absolutely, because you're unmoored from the typical expectations and limitations of regular life,
Yeah.
So it'll make everything way worse because if you have a bad relationship with alcohol, it's going to be, or drugs, it's going to be even worse because you can get as much alcohol and drugs as you want.
Yeah.
Whereas before you might have had to wait,
Right. Right. So third question. What is the thing in your life that you've lost that you regret losing the most?
Oh, my bear. I had a little doll when I was a kid, this bear. I called it Bear. It kind of was a bear. It was a white little bear-shaped thing with a little shirt on.
Yeah.
I have pictures of it, but I left it outside. I was probably like 6 years old maybe. I left it outside one night, and then when I went back to get it, it was gone, and it just plagued me for years. I used to imagine an invention, a little black box with a red button, and when you press the red button, everything in the world would disappear except the thing you're looking for. Even if it was in another country, you could see it way out in the distance. And I used to daydream about having that to find Bear, but I never found Bear. So it's Bear.
R.I.P. Bear. Gone too soon, man.
Yeah, I know.
Tell me about a time you received an act of kindness from a stranger.
Well, it would be from a stranger. That's a good question. I mean, I think I receive an act of kindness from a stranger every time I play a show. When I sit up there in front of the current crop of people I'm playing for, the little kids, little 0 to 5-year-olds and their parents, I get incredible acts of kindness from them. Clapping, singing, dancing, involvement, smiling. So I would classify those as acts of kindness from strangers, which I get every day. Yeah.
What's your favorite place to gig?
Oh, my favorite place to gig. Currently, it's like there's a lot of little towns near Seattle that have little theaters that were formerly opulent, like the Marysville Opera House or the Chalet Theater in Chehalis. Or they're these slightly dilapidated but well-loved little theaters. Those are my favorite because they have kind of the formality of it's a show, but they're small enough and funky enough to be kind of arty and interesting. So, yeah.
I'm fortunate enough to be married to an actress, and she performs in a lot of those spaces. There's one in Columbus, Georgia called the Springer Theater and Opera House, and it is this enormous Southern Gothic theater that was built just after the end of the Civil War, and it's beautiful. It's Victorian, and is it like the Met? No, it's nothing like the Met. It's something sort of.
See, I don't like that atmosphere though. That kind of this is it. It's intense. I've done shows at even Caspar shows at like Symphony Hall here in Seattle, Benaroya Hall, with the symphony, and there's such a oh my God, it's like the moment. I like the casualness of a dilapidated theater.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something great about it. The sort of like faded glory of those, like the gilt and the art and the trim work and stuff. It's amazing.
Exactly.
So, income and visa considerations aside, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
I would live in the countryside in Japan.
Oh yeah.
Somewhere in the foothills of a mountain, in a tiny shack near a river for fresh water with Kate, and we would have just this like little, pit in the middle of the floor where we would cook our food. And that's kind of what we're going to do on Vashon. I think actually I'm going to amend that. Vashon.
Yeah? Tell me about
I want to
Vashon.
live on Vashon Island. Well, it's a little island near Seattle. It's like a 20-minute ferry ride from West Seattle, and then another 20-minute drive to our house down in the south end. But it's such a great community of artists and musicians, good people who are easy to run into. You talk about social media and how we kind of sometimes need it to connect. Vashon's beautiful because you can just go to the Snapdragon, the little vegan restaurant, and have something to eat, and the potential is there for you to stay there for 4 or 5 hours just talking to people as they come and go. And it's got that like small town Andy Griffiths kind of vibe, but it's very arty. It's very artsy and art forward and music and everything. So
it sounds like this. There's this pickup maker from the Pacific Northwest named Jason Lawler, and I think he might live on Vashon Island. I'm not sure. I'm going to look that up. But yeah, he
sounds familiar.
I talked to him once years ago. He was making pickups for a friend of mine, and I walked in on a conference call. It was real casual, and I was like, "How's the weather?" And he was like, "Oh, I live on this island off the coast of Washington State." And it might have been Vashon Island.
Yeah, might have been.
Do you have a perfect musical instrument, like a perfect ideal musical instrument? And if so, do you own it?
Oh yeah, I definitely do, and I do. I have a lot of them. Right now, what I've done is so I play 3-string, and 2-string. So I take guitars and set them up as baritone 3 strings and tenor 3 strings, and I have a ukulele that's a 3-string, and I have a baritone ukulele, and I have a banjo, and I have an electric guitar that's a baritone, or an electric guitar that's a tenor. Mm-hmm. So every guitar I have does one job, kind of.
Yeah.
And so they're all like active soldiers in the Caspar army.
Yeah.
I don't really like to have dead weight around. If a guitar doesn't really prove itself in a year or so and it doesn't become integral, I get rid of it and make room for something else. But I'm up to, I probably have, a dozen, I think, and they all have a purpose, and they're all winners at their little purpose. So I'd have to say yes, and all of them.
Is there a guitar or other instrument that you've lost either because you had to sell it or pawn it or because it was stolen that you desperately wish you could have back?
Yeah, the Yamaha 12-string that my dad had was a really magical guitar because I set it up as an 8-string, so I only doubled the B and the E, the high ones, and it just had this really warm, round, beautiful tone, and the doubled strings kind of made it ring out. And I don't know what happened to that thing. I have no idea.
Was it one of the red label Nippon-Gaki FG series Yamahas that everyone raves about?
Boy, I don't know. I don't know. But I have a lot of recordings from that, the early 80s into the mid-'80s where that was my main guitar that I still to this day listen to, and I'm like, oh, that's a great sound. Yamaha flat-top acoustics have just the greatest sound. The unfortunate problem with them is over time the bridge raises up and you end up with unplayable action. Yeah. So if you find an old Yamaha flat-top that hasn't done that, hold on to it for dear life because they're rare.
There's a luthier here who sort of specializes in saving old guitars and also takes these sort of Harmony and K acoustics from the 50s, there's a post-war period, and makes them extraordinary sounding instruments by just kind of peeling off the top and messing with the blocking inside a little bit and opening up a little space here and closing a little down there. And like his he does he has some amazing sounding guitars that were just
wow, that's cool.
pawn shop guitars. Yeah, his name's Scott Baxendale. I'll put a link in the show notes, and I'll send you one in an email too.
Yeah, I should though quickly give my main guitar a shout out. Butterscotch is a 1967 Harmony H41 that I've played. I'm approaching, actually in the next couple days, I will approach 1,200 shows with this guitar.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, it's my Lucille, you know.
Yeah. And you named it Butterscotch.
Butterscotch, yeah. Butterscotch is a good old boy. But it's old, and I'm constantly on the lookout for another one, a replacement. I've ordered one through the internet, and it came, and it was terrible, so I sent it back. But I'm on the hunt for an Harmony H41 in good condition. So
I'll put you in touch with Scott. I'm sure
okay.
if he doesn't have one now, he knows where one is. Harmonies are his thing. So.
Sure. Yeah.
So not too long ago, I was riding home from Charlotte, North Carolina to Athens, Georgia after a gig. And it was late. We'd been delayed leaving after the gig, and we were all tired. And I saw a light in the sky that was an odd shade of blue and totally unexpected. We were way out in the country, and it was a little foggy. And I thought, is that a UFO? I don't believe in UFOs. I'm not a UFO guy. But there was a moment where I was a little baffled because I couldn't figure out. I mean, it was certainly unidentified, whatever it was, and I turned to my bass player, Dan Horowitz, in the passenger seat, and I said, Dan, what is that, man? He's like, I don't know what that is. It's a little weird. And I thought, well, if I was going to see a UFO, I would want to see it with Dan because we've been in bands together for a bazillion years, and I love him, and he's a very, very funny, insightful guy. And, of course, it turned out to be a cell phone tower, but the question... This is the newest question of my series of questions is, if you were riding along in a car one night and you saw a UFO, who would you hope was in the other seat?
I think Mark Sandman. He pops into my head. I think Sandman would have a hilarious take on a UFO.
Yeah.
He's so dry. He was so dry and funny. That's the thing about Mark. Everyone thinks he was so serious and kind of moody, but he was really hilarious. It was one of my favorite things was to make him laugh out loud. Yeah. It was like cracking a code. So I think he might laugh out loud at a UFO. So I'm going to go with Mark Sandman.
Okay. This is the last question. If you can imagine a taxi that can go anywhere in time or space, it's not constrained by the physics of our understanding. And you got into this taxi and you say to the driver, hey, man, take me home. Where is home?
God, I think it's 1880s New York. I'm a working vaudevillian. Not ever going to make the big time, but I just got my circuit and I do it. I play banjo and I sing kind of, ragtimey songs and accompany other performers. And I live on the Lower East Side, and it's paycheck to paycheck, but I'm surrounded by other desperate, awesome, dedicated, creative circus-like people.
Man, I love that answer. That's great.
That's where I went. I didn't actually plan that. I just saw it.
Yeah. Well, man, this has been a real blast, and I'm really grateful we were able to do this.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for taking time to talk and helping me spread the word about the stuff I'm doing now. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, it's my pleasure. Thanks. Man, what an interesting dude. Made a lot of really smart decisions at really good times. I'm really glad he came to talk to us. And And that was a good talk. Remember, if you need to reach the show, it's crashandride@protonmail.com. I'll protect your anonymity at all costs. That email is private, it's encrypted, nobody reads it but me, so, unless you give me express permission to use your name on the air, I will not. Once again, I want to thank my de facto producer, Jake Kreger. He was the first guest ever on the show, and he keeps me sort of in line by sending me show notes and suggestions for how this show can be better. So if it's better, it's Jake's fault. I also want to thank Gene Wolflick and the Powder Room. All the music you hear on Crash and Ride is from the Powder Room's first full-length LP, which is called Curtains. It's available for download on their Bandcamp page. All you got to do is Google Powder Room Athens Curtains Bandcamp, and you'll go right there. There may even be some vinyl left, I'm not sure, but you should get that record. It's extraordinary. I want to thank Jittery Joe's and Greer Amplification for continuing to sponsor the show. If you've been listening to the show and you go and buy something from them, let them know you heard about them on Crash and Ride. That's only going to help this community get stronger. Remember, if you're having a tough time and you're struggling with thoughts of self-harm, you can always call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. It's 24/7, it's confidential, it's free, it's a really extraordinary program. 1-800-273-8255 or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. If you're a trans person struggling with anxiety, depression, or gender dysphoria and you need to talk to a peer, call the Trans Lifeline's Peer Support Line at 1-877-565-8860 or go to translifeline.org. In the meantime, until we speak again, take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Ask for help if you need it. Go see live music. Support your favorite band. And remember that loud guitars save lives.